Hi, my name is James Shepard, and in yesterday's video, I talked about what is cash discounting. Make sure that you watch that video or listen to that podcast episode before you go ahead and watch or listen to this one, okay? Because otherwise it won't make any sense. So now that you understand what cash discounting actually is, I want to talk to you about why you should sell it and how you should sell it. So first of all, let me talk about why you should sell it. It's really pretty simple. Cash discounting is great because it gives you a lot more profit margin, okay? When you're going out to sell somebody right now, let's say somebody does $10,000 in volume and they're currently paying $300 in fees. It's a quick service restaurant, okay? So in order for you to make that sale, traditionally you'd have to go, okay, well instead of 300, I can do it for 250. Right? So you're reducing the profitability of the account. So now instead of making $100 a month in profit, the account only makes $50 a month in profit because you had to reduce the fees by $50 a month in order to get their business. Cash discounting really goes a different direction. Cash discounting says, I'm going to take your fees, Mr. Merchant, from $300 a month to zero, or pretty close to zero, because we're going to actually give you a discount to your customers who pay cash, and they're going to pay more when they pay with credit card. And so what that means is we're going to take that difference, the money that they're paying in addition. So let's back up for a second and do a specific example. You walk into a store and they sell hats, and they sell hats for $10, okay? There's a sign on the store. All the sticker prices are $10. There's a sign on the door that says, we offer a discount for cash paying customer. All pricing in store represents that discount, right? Then when they come up to the counter and they're like, oh, I want to pay with a card, they're like, well, actually the price for our hats is $10.50. The price on here is our cash price as we have illustrated on the door, okay? So they pay $10.50. Where does that 50 cents go? Well, that 50 cents actually ends up going to the processor, because what happens is they charge that $10.50. The processor says, I'm going to charge you 50 cents for that transaction. And so what happens is those two things just equal out. And so they collect 50 cents from the merchant collects 50 cents from the customer, and it's zero processing. Okay. Now, because you're doing it that way, you might come in and this, again, same merchant, they're doing $10,000 in volume, they're paying $300 in fees. Normally you'd have to go down to $250. With cash discounting, you might actually go up to $400, because you might say, we'll do a 4% cash discount, which is the maximum amount allowed. So you could say, okay, we're gonna do a 4% cash discount, right? So now they're paying $400, but they're collecting $400 from their customers, okay? So that's one way you can look at it, is it's a way to increase the margin, because the business owner doesn't really care how much you're charging in credit card processing fees to them, because they're really just passing that on to their customers anyway. They're not really the ones paying it anymore. So it gives you a higher margin. The other thing about it that's actually really interesting is that you can also end up putting a terminal lease in there if you're going to sell something like, the point terminal, something along those lines, where you can maybe put a small lease in there or a rental fee or something on the equipment. Now this actually does make sense, because this equipment has to be specially programmed. There's not that many processors right now that actually have the programming capabilities to do the cash discounting. There's a few big players in the industry that have the back-end software to make this all work. It's a little more complicated than you might think to get, an Ingenico terminal to be able to do a cash discount. There's certain things that have to be programmed in there, notifications on the receipt, like there's different things that have to happen. And so you have to find a processor that has all that working. So the terminals, you can justify and say this terminal does cash discounting, so I'm going to charge X for the terminal. So what it does, it opens back up kind of an old pathway. It used to be 10 years ago in credit card processing, most of the money was made on leases. Now again, I'm not talking about ridiculous, I'm not saying you should do a $99 a month, 60-month lease on a VX520 or something ridiculous, but you can do a reasonable lease, because these terminals are harder to program, they're different, they're a new terminal upgrade that they have to get. So it just allows you to open up some different opportunities with equipment. Again, whatever you're comfortable with. It's so funny to me in the industry how I talk to people that are like, oh, I would never lease a terminal. Okay, but you'll do a price increase once every 3 months for 5 years. Okay. So, I think there's some moral ambiguity there, to say the least, but the idea is you can do whatever you want with it, but because of the fact that the merchant goes from paying $400 a month to zero, you can add $29.95 a month in a rental fee or a lease for the equipment and say there's a certain terminal that you have to make this happen, and here it is. So that's why you would sell it, is that it makes more money. Now, how to sell it is a little bit more tricky. So a couple things have to happen for you to be able to sell cash discounting, and it's so funny. I had a great conversation today with a guy who named Michael Fair, who I'm really good friends with. He and I have talked several times. He's near me here in the area, and he has some salespeople that sell cash discounting. And so we were talking about it, and it was so funny because both of us actually had a little bit of a hard time when we went out in the field to sell cash discounting. And the reason is actually really simple. We were talking about it. Neither one of us actually believes in cash discounting. In other words, when I talk to a business owner, I think it's a stupid decision for them to do cash discounting. I think it makes a lot more sense for them to just raise their prices a little bit to offset the cost of credit card processing, and that way they don't tick off all their customers by collecting the fees, okay? That's my opinion, all right? So when I go out to sell it, what do? I hedge, and I'm like, hey, I got this cash discounting program if you're interested in it. If not, I totally understand. I have this other program. And then they're like, okay, so clearly you don't like the idea. Why should I like the idea, right? You can't sell something you don't believe in. So I had a rough time out in the field selling this because I don't believe in it for most business types. But the interesting is, Michael Fair, he has reps, and I have reps that are killing it with cash discounting. Why? Because they think it's a great idea. And it's like, it totally makes sense to them. Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the funny thing is, businesses that actually implement the cash discounting, they really don't get a lot of pushback. And so I want to make it really clear that my philosophy, I could be wrong about this. I probably am wrong. It's probably a really good idea. I just don't get it yet. So the number one thing about how to sell it or, to actually make it work is you have to believe in it. So look into it and make sure that you're like, yeah, I get that cash discounting, because there's other things you can do. You can sell point terminals. You can sell Clover. You can do all kinds of other things, right? Sell flat rate. There's other things you can do to differentiate. But if you believe in the cash discounting, then you can sell cash discounting. That's the first thing that you have to do. Secondly, you got to figure out what model you're going to use for different business types, okay? Sit-down restaurants, really, really tough, okay? Because again, you got to think about the interaction with the customer at the time of payment. If the interaction with the customer at time of payment is a very involved thing like a sit-down restaurant where you're giving them the receipt, they're looking at it, they're choosing their tip amount or whatever, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. If you're talking about a pizza shop with a big line out the door, that doesn't want to explain the cash discount, that might be a little more difficult. But for a lot of other businesses, it does make sense for them. It's a retail store, people are walking in, it's a car repair place or whatever. It's a great way for you to differentiate, to sell that by walking in and basically saying, hey, look, we have a new program. We basically take your processing down to zero. What we do is we help you set up a program where it's a cash discount program where you're providing a discount to your customers to pay with cash, but it's not really a discount because it's whatever your pricing currently is. That's the cash price. Everything else is a credit card price. So we can set it up. It's a special terminal. It's a special program that allows you to do this. And basically what happens is instead of charging you the credit card processing fees, we charge your customers the credit card processing fee. And that helps them to either use cash, which saves you money, or use their card, which costs you nothing extra because you're discounting when they pay with cash. And we are charging you the same thing that you're charging your customer if they pay with a credit card. So that is how you sell cash discounting. But remember, you've got to believe in it in order to sell it, as always. My name is James Shepard. Thanks so much for taking time to watch or listen to this episode.